The blood of an innocent human girl stained the alien soil, and her dad, a battle-hardened super soldier, would paint that entire world red with the blood of her killers. George Rice had put war behind him, content to raise his precious daughter Lily on a remote colony shared by humans and the technologically advanced Bajorans. He never imagined his past as an elite special forces operative would come back to haunt him in the most devastating way possible. Lily just wanted to explore, to see more of the alien world she called home. She ventured past the invisible borders of the human settlement, straight into Bajoran territory. A gang of cruel Bajoran youths confronted the 8-year-old girl. Harsh words escalated to violence in a heartbeat. The ringleader, a vicious female named Mira, shoved Lily in a fit of unchecked alien rage. Lily's head cracked against a rock, her small body crumpling to the ground. Blood matted her hair, pooling beneath her motionless form. The Bajorans scattered like the cowardly vermin they were. Hours passed before human colonists found Lily, broken and barely clinging to life. They rushed her to the settlement's meager clinic, but even the best human doctor couldn't save her with such primitive equipment and medicine. Lily took her final breath on that operating table, an ocean away from her father's loving arms. George's world shattered when he received word of his daughter's senseless murder. Grief-stricken, he was informed that the Bajorans were refusing to hand over the youths responsible or press any charges. They were calling it a tragic misunderstanding. Lily's death would go unpunished. That was their second mistake. Their first was laying hands on George Rice's daughter. There are 3 things that every being in the universe should know to fear: a black hole, a supernova, and a human with nothing left to lose. The Bajorans were about to learn that final lesson the hard way. For the first time in 8 years, George opened the footlocker at the base of his bed. His old tactical gear and weapons felt like long-lost friends in his hands. Special Forces Operative George Rice was a name uttered with reverence and fear in certain circles. A man who could wage a one-man war and come out the other side. The Bajorans had awoken a slumbering beast, a man who could face down armies all by himself, a super soldier with a very particular set of skills and the burning need to paint an alien world red with blood. George would not stop until everyone who had a hand in his daughter's death, from the spineless politicians to the psychotic youths themselves, was in the ground. And if he had to tear the Bajorans' so-called advanced society apart to do it, so be it. His grief fueled the fire of vengeance in his veins. The fragile peace between humans and Bajorans teetered on a razor's edge as the bereaved father began his rampage. The Bajorans would throw their elite soldiers and superior weapons at him, but he would cut through them all like a human scythe of death. The unstoppable force of human vengeance was about to meet the immovable object of Bajoran arrogance, and by the time the blood dried and the screams faded, the aliens would learn the folly of underestimating the most dangerous being in the universe, a human father out for blood. Under the cover of darkness, George Rice approached the sprawling Bajoran military complex, his heart filled with a cold, simmering fury. The scent of alien foliage hung heavy in the humid night air as he ghosted through the dense undergrowth, his footsteps silent and purposeful. The perimeter fence loomed before him, a high-tech barrier that would have daunted a lesser man. But George was no ordinary soldier. With practiced ease, he disabled the sensors and sliced through the reinforced metal like it was tissue paper. Inside the base, George moved like a wraith, his special forces training guiding him through the maze of buildings and patrols. Bajoran guards fell before they even knew he was there, their high-tech armor useless against the human skill and savagery. The armory was laughably easy to infiltrate. George hacked the lock with a few deft keystrokes, his lip curling in disdain at the Bajorans' overconfidence in their own technology. Inside, rows of gleaming weapons and armor beckoned. George equipped himself methodically, selecting only the deadliest tools of war. A suit of powered battle armor, sleek and menacing. An experimental plasma rifle, its energy cells pulsing with barely contained destruction. And there, in a reinforced case, the crown jewel, a Bajoran cloaking device, stolen from a race whose name was spoken only in whispers. Fully kitted out, George activated the cloak and vanished from sight, a predator with the perfect camouflage. He slipped out of the base like a ghost, leaving a trail of broken Bajoran bodies in his wake. In the Bajoran capital, a group of teenage aliens huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Rumors of a vengeful human specter had reached even their young ears. Mira, their ringleader, scoffed at such nonsense, assuring her friends that no single human could threaten them. How wrong she was. George fell upon them like a force of nature, his movements a blur of violence and rage. The Bajoran youths barely had time to scream before he was among them, the powered servos of his armor granting him speed and strength far beyond an ordinary human. One by one, he took them apart, his armored fists and crackling energy blade turning their haughty sneers to wails of terror and pain. Bones shattered, flesh sizzled, high-tech implants sparked and ruptured. When it was over, George stood amidst a scene of carnage, the broken bodies of Lily's killers strewn about like discarded rag dolls. Mira lay at his feet, her once pretty face a ruined mess of blood and tears, begging for a mercy she had never shown his daughter. George leaned down, his voice a rasping growl through his helmet speakers. This is what it feels like to be helpless, to be afraid, to suffer. Remember that in the long, agonizing nights to come. He left them alive, but only just. A message to the Bajorans, a declaration of war against a species that had crossed the wrong father. By the time dawn lit the alien sky, word of George's rampage had spread to every corner of the colony. The Bajorans reacted with predictable arrogance, dispatching their police force to bring the rogue human to heel. They came for him in the streets of the capital, a phalanx of armored vehicles and elite Bajoran officers dripping with advanced weapons. They surrounded George, barking demands for his surrender. His response was as sudden as it was brutal. The plasma rifle spat searing death, punching through the Bajorans' vaunted armor like it was paper. Cops died screaming as the superheated blasts melted flesh from bone. George moved among them like the specter of death itself, his cloaking field shimmering as he dealt blow after lethal blow. It was over in seconds. The street was transformed into a smoldering wasteland of wrecked vehicles and charred Bajoran corpses. George stood alone in the devastation, a one-man army that had annihilated an entire police force without breaking a sweat. The powers that be on Bajor were quick to realize the true scope of the threat George posed. This was no mere criminal to be contained, but an existential threat to their entire civilization. They deployed their elite special forces units, each soldier a biologically and technologically augmented super warrior armed with the best weapons Bajoran science could provide. Their orders were simple: find George Rice and terminate him on sight no matter the collateral damage. For George, the hunt had become a deadly game of cat and mouse. He would strike hard and fast, whittling down the Bajoran elites in ambushes and lightning raids, only to fade away like smoke through the cloaking field. But each engagement cost him, in blood, in ammo, in the relentless toll of battle against an entire world. The end, when it came, was as brutal as it was inevitable. They cornered him in a remote wilderness, a titanic firefight erupting as plasma bolts and neutron beams crisscrossed the alien landscape. George fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting sun-bright death until its power cell ran dry. Bajoran bodies piled high around him, but for each one that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. In the end, not even a human juggernaut could stand alone against such odds. His armor shattered and his weapons spent. George collapsed to his knees in the blasted ruin of the battlefield, Bajoran guns leveled at him from every direction. A normal man would have succumbed to his wounds long ago. But George Rice was far from normal. With a roar of primal fury, he surged to his feet and launched himself at the nearest Bajoran trooper, his last working plasma blade carving through the alien's chest plate in a fountain of gore. They fell upon him like jackals, Bajoran fists and rifle butts hammering him from every angle. George gave as good as he got, his augmented body crushing alien skulls and pulping organs with each titanic blow. But even he could not fight forever. Beaten and bloody, on the ragged edge of death, George was finally brought low, his body broken, but his spirit undefeated. The Bajorans stood over him in triumph, their armor dented and their skin bruised, marveling at the destruction one human had wrought. But even as George faded toward unconsciousness, the sound of distant explosions and plasma fire reached his ears. All over the colony, human rebels were rising up, inspired by his example and pushed beyond endurance by Bajoran oppression. George smiled through blood-flecked lips as the darkness claimed him. He had started something here, lit a spark that would soon become an inferno. The Bajorans had sown the seeds of their own destruction, and now the harvest of blood and fire was at hand. The war for the colony, for freedom, for vengeance, had only just begun. George's eyes blazed with intensity as he addressed the gathered human colonists. They took everything from us, our dignity, our freedom, my daughter. His voice cracked. No more. Today we take it all back. A roar went up from the crowd. Farmers clutched makeshift weapons. Miners hefted industrial tools as clubs. George's tactical mind cataloged their strengths and weaknesses. We strike tonight, he announced. Small teams, hit and run, bleed them until they break. Under cover of darkness, George led the first raid himself. They slipped past Bajoran patrols, George's stolen cloaking device rendering them invisible. The armory's security was child's play to bypass. Grab everything you can carry, George ordered as they stuffed sacks with plasma rifles and energy cells. An alarm blared. Bajoran voices shouted. George's team melted into the night, leaving confusion in their wake. Similar scenes played out across the colony. Human insurgents struck like ghosts, vanishing before the Bajorans could respond. Each successful raid swelled their ranks and arsenal. George pored over stolen intelligence reports. They're bringing in reinforcements, he told his lieutenants. We need to change tactics. He deployed scouts to every corner of Bajoran territory. Through a network of sympathizers, information flowed back to George's hidden base. Here, and here, George said, jabbing a finger at a holomap. They're fuel depots. We hit them all at once. The coordinated strikes crippled Bajoran logistics. As aliens scrambled to contain the damage, George's forces melted away, only to reappear elsewhere. Power plants went dark. Communication relays fell silent. The Bajoran war machine ground to a halt. Alien reprisals were swift and brutal. Public executions of captured rebels became commonplace, but each martyr only stoked the fires of human willpower. In a shadowy bunker, George faced his most difficult task. Mira, the Bajoran who killed his daughter, knelt before him. Her eyes widened with fear as he raised a plasma pistol. Please, she whimpered. I didn't mean to. George's finger tightened on the trigger. Lily's face flashed in his mind. With a snarl, he squeezed. The footage of Mira's execution spread like wildfire. Bajoran morale plummeted. Human persistence hardened into unbreakable dedication. Prison doors swung open as George's forces liberated camp after camp. Released captives swelled the ranks of his army. The final assault on the colony capital was a lightning strike of brutal efficiency. George stood atop the command citadel, surveying the fallen city. A ragged cheer went up as the human flag unfurled above. "Oh, we've won," a lieutenant said, grinning. George's eyes narrowed. "Not yet," he growled. "The Bajorans still have teeth, and cornered animals are the most dangerous." As if in answer, a distant rumble shook the ground. George's blood ran cold as he recognized the sound. The Bajorans weren't done, not by a long shot. The ground shook with a bone-rattling rumble. George's blood ran cold as he recognized the sound. "Sir, we're picking up massive energy readings from the northern wastes," a lieutenant reported, voice tight with fear. George's mind raced. The Bajorans had activated their doomsday weapon, an experimental antimatter warhead buried deep beneath the colony surface. "How long?" George demanded. "Unknown, sir, but if that thing goes off, it'll vaporize everything within 1,000 kilometers. George set his jaw. Not if I can help it. Assemble our best. We move now. Within the hour, George led a strike team through the night, racing against time. Resistance scouts had pinpointed the warhead's location, a fortified silo complex nestled in the barren northern wastes. They encountered the first Bajoran defenders at the perimeter. Plasma fire lit up the darkness as George's team fought their way through. "Push forward!" George roared, his own rifle spitting death. Inside the complex, alarms blared. Bajoran voices shouted in panic. George's team battled room by room, corridor by corridor. A final blast door stood between them and the warhead chamber. As George's tech expert worked to bypass the lock, screams erupted from inside. "They're initiating the countdown!" The door slid open to reveal a scene of chaos. Bajoran technicians lay dead, cut down by their own leaders in a final act of spite. On a massive view screen, red numbers ticked downward. George's team swarmed the control stations, desperately trying to abort the sequence. Nothing worked. "It's no use," a soldier reported. "The safeties are fried. This thing's going off no matter what." George stared at the antimatter containment unit, its magnetic bottle pulsing with barely contained destruction. His mind flashed to Lily, to the countless human lives about to be snuffed out. "Not if I can help it," he growled. George stripped off his armor, donning a reinforced blast suit. His men protested, but he silenced them with a look. "Get topside, that's an order." The countdown hit single digits as George descended into the active weapon chamber. Radiation alarms shrieked in his ears. With no time for finesse, George tore into the containment unit with his bare hands. Searing pain lanced through him as leaking antimatter ate through his suit. George ignored it, reconfiguring wires and circuits by touch alone. 3, 2, 1. George completed the final override, just as the detonation sequence reached 0. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the weapon sputtered and died, its payload venting harmlessly into space. George staggered from the chamber, flesh seared and bones aching. He'd won, but at a terrible cost. Terminal radiation poisoning ensured these would be his last days. In the weeks that followed, George worked tirelessly to shore up the resistance leadership, and in secret, he prepared one final act of vengeance against those who'd wronged him. The antimatter fires raged across the galaxy, consuming Bajoran worlds in an inferno of unrestrained destruction. On the bridge of the last functioning Bajoran command ship, Admiral Kira watched helplessly as reports flooded in from every corner of the Empire. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Cardassian sector," a young officer reported, his voice cracking. "The antimatter surge has overrun our defenses." Kira's face remained impassive, but his hands gripped the command chair tightly. "What about the core worlds?" "Gone, sir. The capital, it's just gone." The bridge fell silent as the weight of their civilization's collapse settled upon them. Centuries of Bajoran dominance, snuffed out in a matter of days by one human's quest for vengeance. As the Bajoran Empire crumbled, opportunists swarmed to fill the void. Jack Harper, a former colonist turned rebel, stood on the bridge of his newly acquired warship. The vessel, a Bajoran cruiser abandoned by its fleeing crew, now served as the flagship for Harper's growing pirate fleet. "Set course for the Denali system," Harper ordered. "The Bajorans left a treasure trove of technology there. It's time we claimed it for ourselves." His crew, a motley assortment of ex-rebels and adventure seekers, cheered as the ship jumped to warp. Harper allowed himself a small smile. George Rice had shown them the way, and now a new era of human ascendancy was dawning. Back on the colony world where it all began, Reina Santiago paced the halls of the former Bajoran governor's mansion. The building, once a symbol of alien oppression, now served as the seat of the fledgling human government. "We can't let them get away with it," a voice shouted from the council chamber. "Every Bajoran left alive is a threat to our freedom." Reina burst through the doors, her eyes blazing. "Enough! We didn't fight this war just to become the very monsters we sought to overthrow." The room fell silent as Reina glared at each council member in turn. We will build something better here, something worthy of the sacrifices made to win our freedom. As the galaxy burned and new powers rose from the ashes, a small freighter drifted through the chaos. In its cramped medical bay, Sarah screamed as contractions racked her body. The ship's doctor, a grizzled veteran of a dozen colonial conflicts, worked frantically to deliver the child. "One more push," he urged. "You're almost there." With a final agonized cry, Sarah brought her daughter into the universe. She cradled the infant in her arms, tears of joy mingling with exhaustion. "Lily," she whispered. "Your name is Lily." The moment of peace was shattered as alarms blared throughout the ship. A stray pulse of antimatter energy, a remnant of the galactic conflagration, slammed into the freighter's hull. Sarah's eyes widened in terror as she saw the bulkhead behind the doctor begin to glow white-hot. "Take her!" Sarah screamed, thrusting the baby into the arms of a nearby crewman. The antimatter surge breached the hull, consuming Sarah in a flash of impossible light. In the aftermath, the ship's captain stared at the wailing infant. "What the hell are we supposed to do with a baby?" he growled. "I know a guy on Omega Station," his first mate replied. "Deals in all sorts of merchandise. Bet he'd pay good credits for a healthy human child." Before they could finalize their plan, a massive ship dropped out of warp alongside them. The comm crackled to life, and a woman's voice filled the bridge. "This is Reina Santiago of the Human Liberation Front. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." As Reina's troops secured the freighter, a young soldier burst into the bridge, cradling a bundle in his arms. "Commander, you need to see this," he said, handing Reina the infant. Reina's breath caught as she saw the name hastily scrawled on the child's blanket. "Lily," she whispered. The soldier nodded. Just like George's daughter," Reina finished.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.